If you didn't get a chance to watch my previous look at Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, I encourage you to do so. I'm actually going to post a link to it in the description below. There, I really defended this game for a lot of reasons, and I really made it in kind of counter to a lot of the other critics who really bashed this game and made a lot of fun of it, and made fun of the gameplay, the mechanics, the graphics, the looks, the feel, the aesthetic, to the point that if it was left up to the critics, this game most likely would have been canceled or should have been canceled, and everybody who worked on the project should have been lynched in the streets. I have no financial gain whether Final Fantasy does good or not. I'm just a fan of the series. Final Fantasy is one of those series, for me personally, which I have very fond memories of, and I remember a very, very, very long time ago, when I was over 30 years ago, okay? I remember playing Final Fantasy for the first time on my Nintendo. Then I played what was Final Fantasy 2 and 3, at least introduced to me then. We now know that there were actually other Final Fantasies in line, back on the Super Nintendo, and being blown away, being transported to Crazy World. I just did a video not too long ago saying that Final Fantasy VII Remake is my favorite game ever, which may come as a surprise to some because I've always violently defended Shadow of the Colossus as my favorite game ever. So clearly Final Fantasy is doing something right for me that really just hits me in the feels. It definitely has a abundance of fantasy to it, but it usually has a pretty meaningful story and characters and plot development and all that stuff. Now, what we're looking at today is the second alpha. And the question is, did Team Ninja, quote-unquote, learn from their mistakes? When this was announced, Team Ninja said, hey, we went back and read all of your feedback from the first alpha, and we have made some significant changes to the game. We hope that you'll like them. Now, I don't remember if a lot of you guys played the Neo Technical Alpha. I did, and I loved it, and I left some pretty critical feedback. And to my great surprise, when the game finally launched after that, they had actually listened to what we said and made a lot of positive changes. And I think you'd have a very hard time finding people who don't think that Neo 1 and Neo 2 are masterpiece games. I think a lot of it has to do with that feedback loop from the audience. So, did Team Ninja learn from the first alpha? Did things get better? Is this a totally different game? Well, I wish to say it was a totally different game in terms of some of the lingering issues that remain, which I will get into in a moment. But ultimately, I think they did listen. This game has definitely got more layers of polish on it. It's very clear to me. There's still things that are broken, but I can tell that they have actually listened and continued to fix the things that were not right, namely the combat, which had some minor issues. I will say that the first alpha, the battle with Chaos, was phenomenal, and it honestly did not really give you even a hint of the battle previous to fighting with Chaos, because it was just so good. It was very polished and refined. It required you to use all of the skills to your advantage to beat a tough but fair final boss. And I think a lot of people probably gave up and just didn't defeat him, or knocked the difficulty down to, I think it's called story mode, which essentially makes it easier. But he was still tough to beat. Very tough to beat. And I wonder if they put that in there just as like that, you know, that brass ring that's just a little out of reach. Because I don't think a lot of people beat it. I really don't. What I will say is that they have taken that element of great combat and they have really started to inject it into all of the other combat. That's not to say that every boss you fight, and not every minion you fight is going to be a boss fight. I'm not saying that. But a lot of the looseness of the gameplay from the first go-round has been increased. And it's a lot tighter now. It's a lot better of a game. It doesn't feel as sloppy as the first one did. Combat definitely feels smoother, more refined. I feel like button mashing will absolutely punish you this go-around, not because it was missing inputs and not because you didn't understand what was going on. When you press a button, you get a snappy response. And this is honestly what you would expect from a game, which, again, makes me feel like that first gameplay that came out maybe was a little too soon. Maybe. Either way, this one is here now. And if the game continues along this path, I'm sold. But truth be told, I was sold after the first one. A lot of people like to pick on the trailer, where the main character just keeps screaming chaos over and over and over. Agree, it was a little bit of an odd trailer, but I think it's a major red herring. There's a lot of stuff going on in this second gameplay alpha that indicate there are ties into things greater than the original Final Fantasy 1, which definitely doesn't give a lot of credit. It should. It doesn't get much credit at all. It's largely forgotten. Very, very compelling story there. We'll see how much that ties into this particular story. But where this game takes a sharp turn is after you beat Chaos. You go to a new area. And the new area points back to a different world in Final Fantasy. And I now start to wonder, like, where is this game really taking place? So from the story element, you have a character who has a cell phone and an earbud, and he's obviously wearing more modern clothes, and still fighting with swords. It's that fantasy element. It's just like Final Fantasy with Prince Noctis fighting people as the king with a sword, and then he goes off in the regalia and he drives down the street. I love the marriage of medieval and modern tech. That is fascinating to me. And no one does it better than Final Fantasy. They create a phenomenal world with clear rules in each world, and the characters abide by those clear rules. And they create some of the best stories. So I'm all on board for that. And I think that this little teaser hopefully quells some of the critics. Maybe they look back at their harshness of the first one and say, hey, you know what? This was actually a very different game than what we thought it was going to be. And, you know, not just writing to get those clicks and to be negative, but actually giving this game kind of a hard thought. Maybe they're starting to realize, too, that this game is actually going to be a lot different than I think people think it's going to be. There's a lot of deception here. There's meant to be a lot of deception here. A lot of the greatest games or movies are built on this idea of this deception. Cloverfield, dumb luck, I just happened to watch Cloverfield today. Nobody knew what Cloverfield was when it came out. Nobody knew. Then it came out and people were like, oh, interesting. So I think in this respect, this game is going to do the same thing. Now, it's on the marketing team and the development team to relay that message of, hey, more than meets the eye. Maybe they can do a better job of that. But as a fan and as a critic, I'm just here for the ride. So I'm very, very excited. I think it's going to be a phenomenal experience because they have fixed a lot of stuff. They will continue to fix a lot of stuff. And Team Ninja does not release bad games. They haven't. Go back and look at their history. Look at the projects they've been involved in. They've all been very fun. A lot of overhauls in this game, still in the positives here. A lot of overhauls in this game where we have a new job system now with additional weapons. We have tons of armor and new characters now. We have new abilities that are unlocked via this system where you kind of attune ability to, you can basically mix and match passives almost. So if you really like the benefit from one thing but you want to use a different weapon, that is okay. It's really coming together in a very, very good way. I'm very excited for this. The negative of it, though, I still feel like we're hurting in the graphic department. For a PlayStation 5 game, this game needs to look better. It needs to run better. There's still a lot of pop-in. There's still a lot of frame rate hiccuping. There's definitely a lot of blurriness, over blurriness. And I think the blurriness is almost to compensate for some of these issues. A lot of times it feels like you're walking almost underwater. Everything is very shiny and lustery. It reminds me still of that kind of PlayStation era. Now, it's gotten better. It definitely has gotten better than what it was before, but it's still not quite there. We now know that this game is going to be coming out in just a few short months. I don't know what kind of overhauls we can expect to see. I think at this point, the best we can hope for is more performance. And I'll have to wait and see kind of how that plays out. Maybe it's this particular area. You know, when you get to the second area, it does pop a little bit more because it's outside in a forest. Maybe these more castle-y areas are a little rougher. I'm not really sure. But I think that's where they need to focus some of their attention now to get a smooth running game. Because when you have a game that has this much complexity to it, and you really look at some of the combat here, where you have not just your standard weak attack, heavy attack, but you have an ability to basically absorb an enemy attack, store it as a charge, and then reuse it later. a lot of these things are not frame perfect, but a lot of these things are, in fact, very, very dependent on very good timing. And when you're getting skips and stutters and not good frame pacing in a game, it does hurt the combat flow. It needs to be a silky smooth performance. I mean, Team Ninja figured this out back on the PS4 days, giving us a really great Neo package on PlayStation Pro that did allow for a 60 frame a second experience. Sure, you have to give up some of the prettiness and all this great crazy lighting and all that wonderful stuff, but you got a solid frame rate, and that is fine. So if we can get that frame rate locked in, I think this game is going to be just epic. I really do. I think it's got a lot going for it. It's clear that the team that's working on it, particularly the head writer, who is working on Final Fantasy VII Remake, which that story blew me away. I feel like they have the right team in place here to finalize this and make it good, and we really will get a true Final Fantasies cross Dark Souls type experience where we are going to have really addicting, punishing combat, but it's going to be, it's going to dip into that well of great Final Fantasy lore and quirkiness where it needs to be. You're going to have a main character who kills what is supposed to be the final boss, turns out to be a fourth party member, and after she gives her long dissertation on kind of why she's doing what she's doing, he thinks for a moment and looks at her and says, "Bullshit," then plays some weird rock music on his phone and walks out like a total badass. It's weird, but it's Final Fantasy, and I'm okay with that. If you're not into the story part of it, I feel like the combat part of it is still there. So I feel like they've done a good job of spreading this kind of mixing genres that make the most sense. Let's get addicting combat. Let's get a phenomenal story. Let's get interesting character design, and let's mix them all together, and let's call that Final Fantasy. And I think we're in a good place for that. The music sounds good. The combat, like I said, feels rewarding. The graphics look good. Everything's there. Or not, graphics don't look good. That's the one piece that's missing. I feel like it's coming along, though. So I just wanted to say again to all the naysayers and to all the people who have kind of dumped on this game from the beginning, shame on you, because I think this is going to be a fun game. I feel like they're going in the right direction. And when the game finally does come out, hopefully the critics are willing to kind of reevaluate this for what it is and enjoy it for what it is, because I know I am, for sure. Last thing I'll say about this game before I wrap up this second technical alpha review and some of the gameplay is that I am a big fan of this game's ability to include more heft the second time around. That was something that was definitely missing from before. When you're swinging your sword, when you're ripping apart an enemy with your bare hands, when you're casting some sort of magical spell, you feel it more. And I don't mean haptic feedback. I mean the game has, it feels like you're a powerful character. And I just got done reviewing one of the Castlevania Advance games, Circle of the Moon, and I talk a lot about how their last third of that game, you feel like a very powerful person when you're retracing some of your older steps and you're just absolutely dominating and smashing enemies, and how powerful you feel. When you're playing this game as Jack, a man who is seething with hatred, he's a violent man. He's got a giant Buster Sword on his back. Well, it's not the Buster Sword, but let's be honest, it's the Buster Sword. And he's running through, fighting packs of enemies, being violent and evil, and ripping them apart and gritting his teeth and screaming and cussing at them. You want to feel like a badass. And this game totally nails that. It really, really does. The executions are very violent. The spells in which you kind of, cast magic, the way you swing your sword, it all feels very powerful. And that was something that was really missing from the first. And I think that's a big step. So if you take a step back and think about the progress they've made so far, understand that more progress will be made. And I think this game is going to be in a phenomenal place. So I'm all on board for this one. I love it. The beta right now, or alpha, whatever they're calling it, is currently available on the PlayStation Store. Do yourself a favor, check it out. Leave some feedback on the survey. Be serious. Give it some serious thought. Team Ninja does have a history of listening. So take your time and really be objective in what you don't like. I'm not saying they're going to call you by name and say, "Oh, thank you so much for finding the pop-in on the third room, Jim. Here's your here." No, I don't expect that, but they do listen. Neo's proof of that. I love this game. I can't wait for it, and it's a day one purchase for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you found this second look somewhat informative. Leave some comments below. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.